Hi, welcome to the Remember to Live podcast. I'm your host, Corrine Canty, a recovering corporate exec, coach, yogi, play advocate, mom, and all around life enthusiast. I've walked the path of burnout and missed opportunities. But here's the thing, I found my way back to living. And I want to take you on that journey too. Tune in weekly for life design tips, authentic stories, and inspiring conversations with those who've chosen to live without regrets. Let's ditch the shoulds and have-tos and remember to live now. So get cozy, grab your favorite warm drink, and let's embrace our big, full, no regrets lives together. In today's episode, we are joined by one of my go-to people in life when I need advice, support, always down to ride out, travel partner, or just a good old laugh. Myla Edmond is a higher education marketing executive with more than 15 years of experience creating higher education marketing strategy. She is an innovative collaborator, inspiring leader, captivating storyteller, and change maker. She's an amazing author and uses her writing as a tool to build a life of intention. Hello, 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 my friend.
Hello, how are you?
I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes. And before we get into the amazing conversation I know we're about to have, I like to start each guest episode by taking a deep breath in getting present in this moment of life we're about to experience together. So let's take a breath. Let's bring ourselves fully here and into our bodies so we can get into this amazing conversation. And I have my warm drink ready as always, but today it's a little different. It's not my normal almond milk matcha. For Christmas, my daughter bought me some fancy coffee makers, like a drip coffee and like fresh beans and a grinder and all the things. So I have fresh ground coffee with freshly made almond milk, and I'm being very fancy coffee today in my warm drink.
I'm not being fancy today. I have my Earl Grey lavender tea with a little bit of honey and milk. One of my favorite drinks.
And I see that you are already manifesting with your cup. This is what a published author looks like. Let's go, my writer, author, extraordinaire friend.
Well, it seemed appropriate for today's conversation.
Yes, and Earl Grey lavender does sound a little fancy.
It might be a little bit.
Just a little fancy. So, you know that you are a special person in my life. And one of my own mirrors when I can't see myself, because we can't see our own face and we can't see our own things happening when they're happening. So we all need those special people. And during one of our recent conversations, as we have many life conversations together, we started talking about it being okay to want more. And I'm so excited to dig deeper into this with you today and have a conversation that I think women, especially Black women and women of color, need to have more often. So to kick us off, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that feeling that comes up of just being grateful and how that sometimes holds us back.
Yeah, I think most of us, and certainly you and I have had this conversation quite a few times in just general talk. We are grateful for where we are, but that doesn't preclude us from wanting to do something different or more or better, because one of the things that we're purposed for is to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when you are in, say, that professional position or that space that you've been preparing for, praying for, whatever it is that you do, when you get there, there's almost this expectation that you should just be grateful that you're there.
Yes.
And after a certain time, you get there, that doesn't mean that you won't want to do something different or expand where you are just because you got to this place. And so I think that notion of just being grateful, while I understand the kind of semantics behind it, it can be very limiting if you don't think about you're not meant to just stay where you are.
Yes. Like gratitude doesn't equal stagnant.
It does
Just
not.
because you're grateful and you achieved something and you feel good about it doesn't mean that you can't go beyond it and that you don't have a lot more capacity for being even more grateful for things that you may continue to dream of.
Well, and I would say that just because you want more doesn't mean you're not grateful for what you have now. They're
Yes.
not mutually exclusive. But I think when we hear be grateful or just be grateful or you should be grateful, there's kind of this expectation that where you are is where you have to stay.
Yeah, and I know in my corporate career, being a Black woman, there's many times where I was a double only, the only
Mm-hmm.
woman at the table,
Mm-hmm.
the only Black woman, Black person at the table, or even person of color, period, at the table. And sometimes when you fill that spot that hasn't been filled with someone that looks like you, it almost feels like you have to stay. It almost feels like a responsibility to hold the place and be the one to hold the door. And so we limit ourselves. And therefore, we're also, I think, possibly limiting other ceilings.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think when I hear responsible, I also think about the fact that you don't want to be the one to mess it up because you
Yes.
know that if you don't meet expectations, and sometimes they're expectations that weren't even articulated to you, you feel this pressure that if I don't do this, then there won't be another Black woman, or there won't be another woman of color, or there won't be another woman, period, put into this position. And that is a pressure that I don't think men carry at all because they get to exist as themselves and not as representatives of a whole race or a whole section of intersectionality. They don't have that.
Yeah. And so you've had an amazing career. And I know that as we create these careers on paper, um, we're almost told what success should look like. We're told what titles we should get. We're told what salary we should feel good about. We're told all of these things and conditioned to climb this very specific ladder or path. And at the end of it, we will find happiness and we will find all of the things that are promised to us. And so many of us do the work, climb the ladder, check the boxes that have been laid out in front of us, and get this feeling of, is this it? And well, where's my pot of gold and my happiness? And I think sometimes that's where that, oh, just be grateful, because so many people want to get to this point, and there's so many people who look at you and look at your life on paper and say, oh man, you got it all. You're living the dream. You've reached the top. What do you mean you want more? What do you mean you want something different? Why would you throw it all away? And we're constantly bombarded with other people's thoughts and ideas of what happiness and success should look like. Um, and I know that we're continually on our own journeys. And as someone who has one of those on paper, very successful careers, how does that impact you in at this stage of life?
You really do have to shut out the noise. And that noise is this external noise that you hear from other people directly, and it's also this external noise of societal expectations. And so you have to shut out the noise. And sometimes the noise is internal because you tell yourself some things that can be limiting too. But you said a lot in even that question. A couple things come to mind. I mean, we kind of talked about growth already. We're not meant to get to a certain place and just stay there. I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking about this in preparation for our talk today, and I was gifted with this plant, beautiful monstera plant, and it came in this really gorgeous blue vase. Blue is one of my favorite colors.
Mm.
But at some point, as the plant kept growing, it was too big for the vase. And so I had to go and replant it. At no point did I look at my monstera and say, stop growing so you can stay in this vase, because the vase is
Right.
beautiful and I like it. I just had to get a bigger pot for my plant. And so I think about that because we're the same way. As we elevate in our careers, as we elevate in the way that we think, sometimes we just need a bigger pot. And we can't
Yes.
punish ourselves for needing that. And we shouldn't feel guilty for needing that. That's what we're meant to do, is grow. And I don't know why when we grow, either professionally, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we have this guilt about needing different. And sometimes it's not more, sometimes it's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we should apologize for wanting that or feeling that. For me, it's not a want, it's always this internal pulling. We shouldn't apologize for having that internal pulling and making decisions to align with that pull.
Yeah, I love that. Yes to bigger pots. But I love that you called out that it's not always wanting more, and sometimes it's just different.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's less. And
Sometimes it's less.
sometimes people realize we get so caught up in the hustle and grind and more and consumerism and everything in life that we actually want a simpler life. And when we get clear on what we want and we separate it from all of the shoulds and the wants that have been given to us and like really learn how to be present with ourselves and understand what we want in life, sometimes that looks like less. And even with that, we can have people in our lives, family members, those that we love, that could make us feel bad about wanting what's most aligned with us. And so it could be on both ends. It could be you're the person in your family who's had the most success and people make you feel guilty or bad about that. And you can't share or celebrate that. And it could be you've reached it and you don't want it anymore. And you want to kind of go against what the expectations have been. And then you can also be made to feel bad about that.
True. I mean, all of that's true. And I think that's why I talk about noise, because sometimes that's what it is. It's just noise. And so what I would say is you have to listen inwardly, because I do think, and I believe in intuition, I do think that our soul, whatever you call this, your intuition, your soul, is always telling you and instructing you on where you should be turning your attention. And that cannot be swayed by somebody else's expectations or what you maybe have been presented as the end goal, because sometimes that's just not for you. I think about growing up, college was not an option, it was an expectation in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciated that because I also saw education as a way out and up. But I think about people who maybe college is not for them. For me, it aligned because I agreed with that. But if it didn't, that would have been a harder path to follow because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't aligned with what I wanted. And I think about how even me graduated from college, like that was what my family wanted for me. All this other stuff that I've done, that's just been intuition pulling me in those directions. And so you have to know for yourself what it is that you're called to do. And then you have to take the steps to get there.
How did you start to learn to tap in and recognize your own intuition and that own calling versus the things that we kind of subconsciously pick up as we're growing up and taking on as our own?
So you mentioned at the top that I'm a writer. That's a very solitary activity. I'm in my head a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's benefited me because, to answer your question, how you get there is you have to listen. If you're constantly in a space of moving and going, you constantly have people surrounding you, you don't spend time alone, you don't spend time being quiet and actively listening, it's a little bit harder. So for me, it's become easy. I mean, it's just like a muscle you exercise. The more you do it, the better you get at it. I know when I need to sit down and just listen. And so I've built a life where I have that time and I sit down and I listen. And I can tell, like I can feel the pull, and as I've gotten older, it doesn't take as long. I
Mm-hmm.
know when my life is shifting, and it starts internally before anything kicks off. Internally, I know something's changing.
Yeah. And we live in this culture where the badge of honor has been, oh, I worked all day and all night and I got 3
Mhm.
hours of sleep and sleep when I die. And
Mhm.
this go, 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 go culture, it can be so hard sometimes to get still. And I work with so many clients when we're learning how to redesign our days and learning how to get present with ourselves and tap into that intuition. And they feel like it's impossible to find the time to get still. And the 2 times of day that I talk to my clients about the most, that you have control over no matter what your life is like, no matter how demanding your job is, no matter what type of caretaker you may be, if you're taking care of young kids or family members or parents or whatever your responsibilities are laying on your plate. Like those moments when you first open your eyes and the moments right before you close your eyes are totally yours. And even if it's 3 minutes, you can take some time to sit there and be with yourself and start to learn, because as I've seen with so many women especially, we're doing so much for everyone else. We're taking care of everyone else. We feel so responsible for everyone else that all of these whispers that our body's trying to tell us to tune in and listen and give us guidance have to turn to roars before we actually listen.
That's so true. And you call it roar. I've referred to them as bricks because I feel like sometimes, life will come at you with a whisper. And then when you don't listen to the whisper, then it's a little bit louder. Then it's a tap on the shoulder. And then you're getting a brick.
Oh, yeah.
And
That brick is coming.
That brick is coming. And so over the years, I've tried to avoid the brick. And so it's just really building in and being intentional about building in that time that you mentioned, whether it's, as you said, in the morning before you start your day or at the end of your day. You just have to be intentional. And unfortunately, too many of us just go through the motions, or we're so exhausted because there's so much on our plates that we sleep as long as we can. By the time we crawl out of bed, like, we don't even have time to give the 3 minutes. And then at night we get in the bed and it's over. Like, there's no intentionality there either. So it is building some intention around, how do I want to start my day and how do I want to end my day, and creating some habitual behaviors on both sides of that.
I love that you called in the word intentional, because if we don't get intentional about how we want to live our lives, if we don't get clear on the lives we want to live and get very intentional about how we set up our days to align with the lives that we want and not the lives that have been prescribed to us, we're going to end up living someone else's life. We're going to end up living someone else's dream. We're going to end up waking up one day and wondering, like, how did I get here? And feeling all of that misalignment in our lives. And I know we talked before about picking your heart, because even when you do the work and you know exactly kind of what you want, and you get into the mode of being able to envision the life you want and start making the changes, we usually have decades of habits that we've built up, and we can quickly fall back into those old habitual behaviors instead of building new behaviors, which isn't always easy. Like, living an aligned life and living the life you really want doesn't mean it's always roses and happiness. We talked before kind of about picking your heart, and I love that phrase that you use.
Yeah, so I was actually having a conversation with my brother about this, because I think the assumption, at least, I can only speak from my side, and that is, because I live the way that I live, the assumption is that my life is easy.
From the outside looking in.
From the outside, it looks like it's easy. And really what it boils down to is I had to intentionally pick my heart. And what I mean by that is, I am the only person in my immediate family that lives on the West Coast. Everyone else is in the Midwest. And that's hard sometimes because, I can't see my nieces do what they do on a daily basis. I can't see my nephew do what he does. And so my heart, though, is, I know that if I didn't live in California, I would make that work, but I wouldn't be as joyful, and I wouldn't find what I find living in California, like seeing palm trees every day and being able to take a walk in December and not have to put on a parka. Like, these are things that sound simple, but I found to bring me a lot of joy, and I found to bring me a lot of peace of mind. And so, is it easy for me to be separated from the family, or, to be thousands of miles away? I can't get in the car and drive to them. No, that's not easy. But the way that my life is structured and how I listen, I have a lot of just peace of mind and freedom being where I am. And so I've had to pick my heart. And I think, when you and I talked about this before, one of the things that I appreciated you saying is if you don't pick your heart, life will pick it for you.
Yes.
And I don't ever want to be in a position where life is picking my heart for me. I'm going to choose, and I make these choices every day.
I think what I love the most about what you brought up is choosing your joy.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many of us are taught, I've just got to work hard right now, and one day I will do this thing, or someday, or when I retire, or I just got to get to this title, or I just got to get to this salary, and we have all these future terms for when we'll allow ourselves to choose our joy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important to choose the joy that's available right now, because someday might not come. Life doesn't wait for someday. And there's way too many people who have gotten to the end of their lives and they look back full of regret because they never chose their joy. And there is a such thing as too late. Like, I am learning that every day, watching my mother in the winter of her life and all of the things she never did and all of the things she wishes she could do now. And like physically, mentally, emotionally, she just can't. And I think that's so sad. And society fuels that. And so being very intentional about choosing your joy, I think choosing your joy is the courageous thing to do. You have to be brave enough to choose your joy, because there's going to be hard that comes along with that, but it could just be all hard.
You're so right. I mean, I think about this notion of later, saving, work hard now, party later, sleep later, all this stuff, do it later. And I just, not only is there's a notion of it could be too late, but why would I want to spend more than a third of my life just working, or more than a third of my life just waiting for that last fourth that may not come, as you're saying? But that doesn't sound like a good ratio to me. I would rather have some joy in my life at every stage. And so, again, you have to listen and know what is your joy in order to make these decisions. But postponing it for, a later time that may not come just doesn't compute for me.
Yeah. And I think what holds a lot of people back is fear. And not only are we bombarded with fearful, negative messages every day, it's what our media focuses on, it's what a lot of our consumerism focuses on, and we're constantly, being given and fed into this scarcity mindset of, I have to get it. There might not be enough. Oh, you got to save for retirement. Oh, you might run out of money. You just got to work, 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 and pile, because one day there might not be enough. Yet we can all think of people that we've seen in our lives that we've heard about the lives they wanted to live. We've heard about their dreams. We've heard about the things that they've wanted to do. And then, 10, 20, 30 years go by and they're still talking about it, seeing it slip away.
So
and
true.
that fear still drives them from not even giving themselves a chance.
It's so true. I mean, I've seen people who talk about, and it could be something as, and I don't mean to oversimplify, but it could be something as simple as moving, relocating, and wanting to see a different life. And just like you said, the years just keep passing. And of course, as time goes on, it becomes even harder. And so I just never wanted that to be me. I never wanted to be someone who woke up one day and wondered what if. And so, over the years, I've thought about, okay, well, this year is my year of why not? This is my year of, yes, I'm just going to do these things and see what happens. I just find that to be much more aligned with who I am, and much more aligned with, as we've talked about, what brings me joy. I like adventure. I like seeing new things. I like having new experiences. And that's one of the things that brings me joy. And so I make decisions that align with choosing joy.
And so we both grew up in the Midwest, and we both had very interesting childhoods, and we both had to learn these tools as adults. And so we weren't naturally born into joyful places, joyful families, joyful environments. We weren't naturally born into, examples of what it is that we want in our lives now. So what are some of the ways that you were able to kind of tap in and start to know that like you wanted different and that it was okay to want joy and that life didn't have to be necessarily the only things we saw around us?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I feel like a couple things come to mind. One, it started really as me trying to essentially save my life, thinking about what I needed because I wasn't always presented with what I needed. And with me going through this writing, and writing for me became something that I did to express what I wouldn't say audibly. And so when you're tapping into essentially who you are,
Mm-hmm.
you find out things like, what do I need? And so it was in that space that I started to see like I wanted different than what I was presented. And so that was the first part. I think the other part was just feeling like if I don't, no one else is going to rescue me here.
Mm.
Like if I don't do this, it's not going to happen. And so just recognizing this is the path that I want. And even though I had support in some ways to get to that path, I had to make the decision to say I'm going to live my life in a way that will lead me to this space. And one example I have is like I said, college wasn't an option, it was the expectation. But once I got to college, I was like, I came home one day and said, I want to live on a ship for not for almost 4 months as
Yeah.
a study abroad program. That was not something that had been presented to me in my family. The only person who had traveled internationally was my uh, paternal grandfather, and he fought in a war. So it was
So I
just
don't know if
like,
that was necessarily like travel internationally. It was
it
kind of
was
like
not.
you're placed
You
internationally.
are placed
Yes.
internationally, and it was not a good experience. And so I just had this, I've always just had this wonder about different places and experiencing different things. And so it is, there's a word you mentioned earlier, and that's bravery. It is having the bravery to want to acknowledge this is what I want to do, but then also to follow through with that want. And so I come back to just listening. And part of that listening is having some self-awareness and then making sure that the decisions you make align with where it is that you see yourself going. Without those two things, it's going to be very difficult to make those choices.
Yeah. And and you've brought up a few times how much writing has helped you in your own personal development and self-discovery journey and helped you get clear in a lot of ways on designing the life that you really want to live. Can you talk a little bit more about the power of writing and how you've used writing in your life? I know a lot of my clients like to journal and don't necessarily know how to get started, or they hear about, oh, journaling is such a good practice, but they might not be sure how to get the thoughts and the
hmm
feelings and the emotions out in a way that doesn't feel intimidating.
It is intimidating. And so when I started, like I said, writing for me was a way for me to express what I wouldn't say. And even starting was challenging because you had to start from this space of no one is ever going to read this.
Mm-hmm.
If you write something, and because one of your fears is always, oh, somebody else is going to see it, so now I don't want to write it down.
Yes.
So you have to give yourself permission to just be honest. The other thing is, what's your intention for the writing? Is it just to, because there's different types of journaling. You could come home and just write about your day. And it could be very superficial. Somebody cut me off in traffic and that made me mad. And that
Mhm.
could be what you wrote about that day. Or you could take it a little bit deeper than that. So it depends on what kind of writing you want to do. But I would say any type is good because reflection is helpful. And
Mhm.
so even with the example of somebody cut me off and it made me mad, you could delve a little bit deeper into that and say, well, what was it about that that made you so mad? Or what emotion did you feel? And does that tie to something else? Is it really a loss of control? Or do you have an aversion to feeling disrespected because of something that happened to you when you were younger? There's different types, but you
Mhm.
have to figure out where you want to take that. And for me, it was certainly a healing process, but also I realized that I actually enjoy it. I actually enjoy writing, and I learned that I love to tell stories and
Mhm.
love to create worlds and characters and do all of that. So I would just say you have to just start. It's like most things that are scary. You have to just start and see where it takes you and give yourself permission to be honest, and don't be so concerned with how it sounds, or, am I spelling this word right, or this doesn't make sense. I think the most healing writing I've done has been when I've just let the pen or let my fingers type wherever they want to go, and not edit myself along the way.
Mm. There's a couple things you said there that resonate so much. And number one is like learning to be honest with yourself. I
Mhm.
remember even as a child having my little diary with the little lockbox and the little, the little cute little
Yes.
diaries that we used to get when we were kids.
Yes.
And through the times when I was like when my father was dying and these big things were happening and my little brain couldn't process it, I would start writing in the diary. But then I remember
Mhm.
even being a kid looking back and like not liking it and like ripping it up and throwing it away
Yeah.
because I didn't like reading my real emotions. Because kids, I mean, anybody who's been around a young child, their kids tell the truth. They don't
They
learn how to
do.
mask it and hide it until they
They
start
do.
growing up a little bit. But the younger the child, the more truth is going to come out. And as we get older, it gets hard sometimes because we put on all these masks and these different identities and all these ways we have to show up in the world, especially if you are different or you're not in the majority or you're in a place where you feel like I'm not going to be accepted as myself.
Mhm.
Sometimes having a writing practice helps us see how we do that with ourselves too. And I know that I have a practice that I do with my clients called Find Your Thread, and really just asking them to evaluate the things that they've done in their lives, the different jobs and hobbies and things. And like, what did you really like about it? And what did you not like about it? What gave you energy and drained your energy? And sometimes I find that people are writing down what they expect someone to hear about it versus
Mhm.
how they really felt.
Well, honesty is such a problem for people. And so when you said that, I was just like, all the bells were going off. I think people are just so afraid of being honest.
Mhm.
People are so afraid of their own truths because once you tell the truth, there's this, what do I do with it?
Mm.
Where do I go from here?
Mhm.
And what I would say is, I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but imagine walking around your entire life and being dishonest with yourself. That, when we talk
Yeah.
about picking your hard, that's much harder. Yeah, you got to walk through your truth.
That's such a big thing. And I think even sometimes more so than, well, what do I do with it? It's, well, what are people going to think about it?
Hmm.
What are going to people going to
Yes.
think if I tell my truth? What are people going to think if I really don't want to be this C-level executive and I just want to go live in the woods and bake cakes and like different things. I
Yeah.
know I mean, and
Yeah.
that sounds amazing if I could just spend all
Yeah.
my spend my days in a cabin baking cakes, but we put so much on what other people think, and we put so much on wanting to be accepted. And I've studied positive intelligence, and we all have these internal voices, these saboteurs, and the number one that we all have, period, is the judge. And we start off by judging ourselves. Most of the time, all of the things that we're thinking people are judging us for they're not thinking about that at all. They're too busy in their minds
No,
judging their own selves. But we
it's true.
constantly think everyone's thinking something about us in having this level of judgment. And sometimes the self-judgment alone keeps us from living the lives we want to live.
That is so true. The judge is such a problem because yes, you're right. It starts internal. The internal judge is the worst. And then I guess my response to that is yes, there are many people who are not paying attention at all to the things that we think. And one example I have is when I was 28, I got diagnosed with vitiligo. And so my skin started to change. And at first I didn't care. I had this attitude like it's just a cosmetic condition. It's not going to kill me. I'm not going to be uncomfortable or have to take medication or anything like that. But as it became more prominent and I started to notice other people's reaction, then I had a reaction. And then I noticed that for a minute, I would say about 2 days, I told myself, I'm not going out. People were just being people. And some folks had some responses that were hard to take. And after 2 days, I'm like, this is not you. This whole, I'm not going out. I'm very social. I like to be out. I like to experience the world. So those 2 days went by and I was like, forget it. I'm just going to go. I felt like as soon as I changed my own attitude, people weren't paying attention to that as much. And I'm not, naive to think people can't see it, but my personality shines through a lot more than the vitiligo. And so I had this internal judgment and I was making it other people's judgment. And that just, I saw that as a real example of most of the time people don't care. So I think finding a way to just live the life that you want, finding a way to tie into what it is that sustains you and letting the judgment go is the best way to move forward. But also the people who are judging your choices, they don't need to be in your circle anyway.
Mm.
And so, it's getting rid of the self judgment, recognizing that most of the time people aren't paying that close attention. And then if someone is, maybe they don't need to be so close to you or have such close access to you.
Yeah. That's a big thing is when we're adults, we get to choose. We get to choose
We
our
get to
tribes. We get to
choose.
choose who we spend our time with. We get to choose to spend more time with the people that fill our cups. And I think
Mhm.
that's important.
It's so important. I mean, I'm so grateful, and I have always expressed my gratitude to the people in my circle. And sometimes the circle can, change a bit as time goes on, but that has been critical to my growth. And I find that I surround myself with people who encourage me to grow. I surround myself with people who are not there to judge. They're just there to support. And they're there to fill me up and they're there to love me for who I am today and for who I'm gonna be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now.
Yes. For the next time we need to get bigger pots.
That's right. They're gonna love me through all my pots.
All the pots. I love that. I love that no matter what we're looking at and thinking about to start to live the life that we really want to live, it really just comes back to us in starting with self and taking the first step and getting present with yourself and giving yourself permission to want more. And whatever that more may be, like you said, more may be different, more actually may be less. More just means I want to show up to this life fully. I want to experience it fully. I'm feeling something in my body calling me that there's more for me in whatever way, shape, or form that takes. And I appreciate you being so open about what that looks like in your life.
Yeah, I think we have to own that the life we create, we have some say so and not just walk around as if life is happening to us. And that doesn't mean that life doesn't present situations that we have to cope with because it absolutely does. But we also have a part to play. And I never want to just acquiesce my part. I want to choose my heart. I want to choose my joy. I want to choose my path. And then I can deal with the other things that life happens to throw in there. But it would be so much harder to have life throw things at me. And then I'm also not choosing me.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's a good note to wrap up this part of the conversation on. And as we come to a close, I do have some rapid fire questions that I ask all of
Oh
our
boy.
guests. And I think these are really, really fun and help us to start to learn how each of us finds joy in our days. So the first question is, what's currently the favorite part of your day?
My favorite part is the end of the day when I actually climb into bed, because I have a bit of a ritual to kind of clear my mind, but also it allows me to give thanks. And so I go through and thank life for everything, from having clean sheets to a roof over my head, to eyes that see, ears that hear, the ability to walk on my own, the ability to think for myself. I give thanks for the love that I have in my life, just all of those things that I don't want to ever take for granted. And in addition to expressing that gratitude, it also just kind of grounds me. And so I try to clear my mind of whatever the day brought and express that gratitude. And plus, it's just nice to just lay down and just lay there. That is my favorite part of the day, hands down.
I mean, rest is not optional.
It is not optional,
It is
and it's
not optional.
actually it brings me joy too. So I welcome that in every night.
And that's beautiful. I think having an evening ritual is critical, and having a gratitude practice makes such a big difference in people's lives.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So my next question is, what's your current cozy?
Current cozy. So I am a fan of hoodies and blankets, and so at night, especially when it's a little cooler, I'll be in a hoodie or wrapped in a blanket. Sometimes both. And I also like light, and so I'll light a candle, turn my fireplace on, or I have this twinkling tree that I keep. As soon as I get home, the tree comes on, and it's not a holiday tree. It's on all year. I turn the tree on, turn the fireplace on, and light a candle because I just love light. So that's my cozy.
That sounds amazing. I think anyone who grew up in Michigan or the Midwest, we know how to have some good blankets.
That's right.
We know how to.
I've had to get lighter ones moving to California, but I still have my blankets.
Oh, that's so awesome. What is your go-to feel-good song?
This is a hard one. We are some music heads. But I will say this song kind of transforms me. I like to think of my weekends as vacations. And so for a long time on Fridays, I would play this song because it would transport me out of work mode into just whatever I wanted. And it is Could You Be Loved by Bob Marley.
Oh, yes.
Whenever I hear that song, I'm just shifted to this is vacation mode and I can do whatever I want now.
Oh, I mean, music can transform your mood
Everything.
so quickly. I think we all should have a go-to feel-good song. That's why I asked this question, because it can instantly transport us to somewhere else. I love that.
Absolutely. I have many more, but I'm gonna say Bob Marley, Could You Be Loved?
Yes, yes. And what is one thing that you do now for your 80-year-old self?
I think for my 80-year-old self, I am in a constant pursuit of peace. I don't want to live my life tormented about anything. I don't want to live my life questioning anything. And so I am in a constant pursuit of peace. And part of that means living honestly. So that's what I do for my 80-year-old self. I pursue peace.
And the final question is, how do you remember to live?
These are some big rapid fire questions. How do I remember to live? A couple things that we've already said, but what I'll add is Reflection. I think about my life when I wasn't as intentional, and I don't want to replicate that, and I don't want to go back to that. And so it's reflecting on the times of how I felt and how my life looked when I just kind of let things be and just let life happen. I don't want to go back to that. And so thinking about, you know, what my life was like then versus now, I try to make sure that I stay intentional, and that's how I remember to live.
Intention. What a perfect word to wrap up our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I love sharing your wisdom and your energy and your light with everyone else because I get to have it all the time. But I think you are such a light, and thank you for sharing it with the listeners.
Thank you for having me, and I'm just so appreciative to you and certainly creating this type of space for these conversations because they're so needed, and it's such a reflection of what I think your journey is bringing that to other people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, my friend. And how can people connect with you? Where can people find you?
I am on LinkedIn, Myla Edmond. And so you can find me there, or you can find me on Instagram, author_Myla Denise.
Awesome. We will put that in the show notes for people to connect. And I am going to let you have an amazing weekend vacation.
Cue Bob Marley.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening to the Remember to Live podcast. I hope you learned some things, laughed a little, and above all else, were inspired to live more fully. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and share with a few friends so we can all help each other remember to live.